All day today at this 21st annual IT and social justice seminar, every panel has mentioned AI and how that's impacting their lives. But we actually have a panel dedicated to discussing embracing the future of AI, cybersecurity, and privacy. We have an exceptional cast of panelists joining us today. Those of you joining us virtually, I know there are many of you out there. Sorry you can't meet with them in person, but I'm just delighted that we have so many industries and perspectives represented at this panel. Moderating this panel will be my fellow partner at Finnegan, Lynn Dupree. She's an exceptional lawyer. She is leading the privacy practice of our firm. Previous to joining Finnegan, she was the Chief Privacy Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. So she knows a thing or two about handling privacy. On a more personal note, she hails from Mississippi and continues to be very passionate about uplifting underprivileged communities. She has lectured to my Howard Law classes and continues to give back and mentors, and is probably one of the most authentic people. And so it's really a personal delight and a privilege to introduce a friend and a partner at the firm, Lynn Dupree. Thank you.
And it is my great pleasure to moderate this discussion today about how we can embrace the future of AI, cybersecurity, and privacy. As I'm sure that you're all aware, this is a topic that these are all topics that we really can't avoid, and they impact us in a myriad of ways. And so we have a stellar panel today with highly impressive backgrounds, and I'm excited to hear their thoughts on these topics. I'll begin with their bios. Today we have Choi Park, who is OpenAI's head of policy and partnerships for the US and Canada. In that role, he leads OpenAI's engagement with federal, state, and provincial governments, as well as external stakeholders and civil society. Prior to joining OpenAI, Choi worked at Microsoft as Senior Director of Congressional Affairs. He also served as the General Counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee and as an Assistant US Attorney in the District of Maryland, prosecuting criminal cases. He is a graduate of Yale University in Georgetown. Next, we have Andrew Andy Cooper, who is the Associate General Counsel at Meta, responsible for strategic transactions and M&A. As a legal coordinator, he has a responsibility for a diverse set of portfolios comprising high-impact strategic transactions, including mergers and acquisitions, technology transactions, IP licensing, and open source. Previously, Andy served as the Vice President and Government Contracts Compliance Officer for UPS, based in Atlanta, Georgia. While at UPS, he was also the youngest and first Black General Counsel of UPS Airlines, the 9th largest airline in the world, and the 3rd largest cargo airline with over 20,000 employees. We also have Ghani Hamadi, who is the Senior Counsel in the Patent Group at FedEx. In this role, Ghani supports the company's global patent strategy, portfolio management, licensing, education, and litigation efforts. Prior to joining FedEx, Ghani was an attorney here at Finnegan in the Washington, D.C. office. His practice involved all aspects of patent law with a focus on patent prosecution, patent portfolio management, complex patent and trade secret litigation. During this time, Ghani also taught patent law and intellectual property as an adjunct professor at Howard University School of Law. And one fun fact about Ghani is that some of his classmates made partner this year, and you came up in the partner. Wow. And last but certainly not least, we have Choi, who has over 25 years of experience through her work in private practice and public service, focusing on capital markets, securities regulation, and corporate law and market risk monitoring. She currently manages the global regulatory operations at Nasdaq with the goal of facilitating capital formation, maintaining an orderly marketplace, and protecting investors. She manages multidisciplinary teams in the US and Europe, responsible for assessing the qualification of listed companies. She was a former in-house counsel at Willis Towers Watson and Northrop Grumman, and has in-depth experience leading complex projects and managing legal matters related to domestic and international M&A, antitrust, venture capital, and strategic alliances. So with those impressive backgrounds, I am certain that we are going to have a dynamic discussion. And I wanted to just, as a matter of level setting, give just a definition of what AI is and isn't. Because we hear it discussed, I think, often in the context of generative AI, but every AI is not generative AI. So I found some terms from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that compiled definitions for the field. And so one of the definitions for artificial intelligence is an interdisciplinary field, usually regarded as a branch of computer science, dealing with models and systems for the performance of functions generally associated with human intelligence, such as reasoning and learning. Generative AI, which is a type of AI, is an artificial intelligence capable of generating new content, such as code, images, music, text, simulations, 3D objects, videos, and so on. And so with that sort of understanding of AI and subcategories of AI, how is artificial intelligence used in your workplace?
Sure. As Lynn mentioned, I perform a regulatory role at Nasdaq, which is a publicly held company. What that means is we have a quasi-government-like powers that has been delegated by the 34 Securities and Exchange Act. And we think about it in two ways. One is with respect to how are the potential bad actors going to manipulate the markets, the trading markets in particular. So thinking about what are the tools are going to be used for purposes of manipulating the markets. On the other hand, we look at it from an internal perspective in terms of how do we create efficiencies and really effectively monitor the trading of securities in over 15 exchanges around the world, which is quite a daunting task sometimes. And we think about AI, and we have used AI as an organization for a very long time, not generative AI, but natural language processing to create efficiencies in terms of looking at SEC filings of our listed companies. We have used AI to create calibrations with respect to the alerts that are generated based on our surveillance of trading. So there's a lot of experience that's been built in, and along with governance of the usage of the AI, how are we using it? What are we using it for? What are the source data? And what is the framework with which we're going to utilize the tools that is available to us to enhance what we do in the markets? So that's how we think about it, both as a protector of the markets, but also as an operator of a program that is very crucial to maintaining the fairness and the orderliness of our trading markets, and that which ultimately allows for the protection of investor interests.
Ghani, how's it used in your company?
Yeah, it's obviously very exciting, the technology that's being presented. I think FedEx use of AI kind of shows the wide spectrum of use for AI. We're just sort of scratching the surface of its use, but I can see how involved all our operations will be with one form or another using AI. We have, obviously, it's a very large company. We have about 550,000 employees, worldwide network, and you have the delivery of packages and the warehousing, sorting aspect, and you also have an airline, and you have deliveries and couriers, and then there's safety. It's being used in all those aspects. So for example, with our couriers and our drivers, as well as our pilots, we're utilizing AI technology to assist with safety protocols and fatigue risk analysis. On the supply chain and sorting side, sort of sexier aspect of it is a lot of the robotics and automation that's being used there. And in some aspects, it's slightly, older technology that's being used, and in many aspects, really cutting edge technology, solving problems that were not solvable even a year ago and are just now starting to break through. So the loading and unloading of trucks, which is an interesting topic because it's something we've tried to work on for a long time. And even the AI vendors who are very excited about solving these problems will come in and say, oh, no problem. And then once they get into it, realize what a difficult task it is. It's almost like driving. There's a lot of things that you just take for granted. Different size boxes and all these different materials and different aspects that you have to think about. So those are some of the ways we're trying to utilize AI. And then obviously in the supply chain and operations, you have 15 to 18 million packages worldwide that are being tracked and sort of fingerprinted. And it's just a massive amount of data. And it's really just now that I think we're able to have the tools to really make use of that data in a way that is helpful for our operations, from efficiency to tracking and forensic analysis. And we also use a lot of AI models for forensic analysis, for intercepting fraudulent packages or intercepting packages that are not supposed to go certain areas in the world that are under sanctions or embargoes. This is a small program, but we have a program that intercepts packages related to fraudulent checks, and able to flag and intercept those types of packages. And I was speaking to someone the other day, and they explained that they've recovered about $50 million so far in fraudulent checks that they've been able to get back to victims. So it's really being used in almost all aspects, and I can't see how it's just going to continue, I think, prevalence.
Well, that's a wide spectrum of uses for artificial intelligence. So in addition to sort of business-driven needs, what are some ways that artificial intelligence can be used and leveraged to impact social justice? Angela, I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Well, I'll start my remarks by not answering the question that you posed. I'll rephrase it slightly.
Would you do that?
I think what I want to answer the question: what are the ways that AI must be leveraged for social justice? And to do that, I think I'll start abstractly, and as we go along, we'll get more specific. There really are two concepts that we have to parse when we're talking about AI. The first is meritocracy, and the other is where AI is in its development. So meritocracy, at its core, the root of the word is merit. And there's an ethical underpinning to it, and that's that everyone should get what they deserve. And unfortunately, all across human history, we haven't been able to do it well because humans get in the way of merit. Enter AI. AI provides for us an opportunity, once it's calibrated correctly, to allow people to have access to what they truly deserve without human filters getting in the way of those outcomes. So where are we in the development of AI? That leads me to kind of the second concept that we need to parse. I think when you ask the question to engineers at different companies, I'm interested to hear where OpenAI is, but generally there are 4 levels of development in AI, and I think we're in the nascent stage of AI development. So there really, for a long time, were reactive machines, reactive computers. These were designed to give a computer an input and it will spit out an output. If you think about your Netflix algorithm, you give it a thumbs up when you like a movie and it'll spit out a recommendation. That's kind of what it does as a device. Then there are these, where we are now, I think, there are these limited memory machines, these LMMs, and they produce these large language models everyone's been talking about. They're generative in their scope. They're designed to mimic our the way our brains work, neural networks. So the more information they get, the better they can become. But that's kind of where we are. But then there's kind of the world beyond that, where we must leverage AI for social justice when we get there. And that's when we get to a place called what I consider emotive machines. I think some people call them theory of mind machines. And that's when AI computers can take data, and that data is then contextualized. It's able to make decisions because it knows how it influences human behavior. If I do this, I know that it's going to provoke another response. And so I can decide how to adjust the output to get the desired result. We're a ways off from that, I think. And then there's the world way beyond that, where we're talking about general AI, we're talking about Skynet, self-awareness, that kind of stuff. We're way away from that, I think. But if there was ever a time for an institute for IP and social justice, it's now, when AI is in its nascency as we move towards its ascendancy. Because from where we are now to where we get tomorrow, there are a lot of stops along the way that AI must be leveraged to make the world a better place. We'll talk about some of those, I think, as we go on, in criminal justice, in banking and finance, in logistics and transportation, in social media and influence. There's so many areas that it touches.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if I can maybe not answer the question if I can. Just to build on what Andy was saying, I think, and one of the words he used, which I was going to key on, is access. I mean, I think that's something that we at OpenAI really see as one of the powerful aspects of generative AI tools. And I appreciate the distinctions. Folks have been using AI, or whether you know it or not, AI has been around you and in the computers and websites, all the things when you look on Google Maps, when you buy something on Amazon, when you go to Netflix, AI is in the works. It's a different type of AI, right? So generative AI, I appreciate it. It's very different and new. ChatGPT is only about a year plus old, which is kind of shocking if you think about the ways in which it's kind of exploded, and now everything seems to be ChatGPT. It's not. To be very clear, there are plenty of, which is good. I mean, there's plenty of tools out there, and the competition, I think, is growing rapidly. And I think it really provides an opportunity for folks across the spectrum of different experiences and fluency with the tools, fluency with the technology to get engaged. I think so I'll start with access to technology, which I think is kind of a democratizing piece. You don't need to know how to code in order to use generative AI, in order to use ChatGPT. You just need to know how to kind of converse. It doesn't even have to be in English, right? And so the fact that you can kind of learn how to build, for example, a website, or build a game, or write a poem, or write some essays, and get the assistance of an AI tool without having to know how to technically code and figure out all the different aspects of it that a computer scientist might need, or a programmer might need. That's, I think, also sort of a democratizing effect there. What it does also is the tool, I think, also helps provide access, for the generative AI tool technology provides access to different types of things like healthcare, language access, education. I mean, Khan Academy, we're partnering with Khan Academy. It's helping to provide, frankly, an individualized tutor in a way that really kind of matches and kind of learns from, the interactions with the student, so that the student can kind of engage with this individualized tutor that is having a conversation without the tutor just giving the answer, right? And so one of the things that I know our leadership and our team is always excited about is the vision of a future where you don't have to be extremely wealthy to have the best, smartest, individualized tutor in the world. That will not replace teachers. The connection to humans is deep and inherent in like the way we're wired. So people will always need the human in the room and the teachers around, but having the ability to adjust for a student's particular needs, I think is a democratizing effect. I think it's pretty powerful. And when you think about not just the context of the US, but the context of the world, right? I have colleagues in working in Asia, Africa, Europe, all around the world, hearing from all the different folks who are so excited about the possibility of using the tools and using it in a way that's just in your hand. You don't need to have a massive infrastructure around you. Obviously, you need internet connection. That helps. That's important. But the ability to kind of have that sort of access point, I think, is going to be something that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, just add to that, because I was at I live in Memphis, and I was at a recent a meeting with the mayor, the larger city, and they were talking about AI. And it was really interesting because it made me think of access, exactly what you said, access. That these tools are, fairly easy to use. That you don't need to be a programmer to use them. And they were talking about how the city, which is always underfunded and never has enough personnel to do the things that they want to do, especially in these underrepresented areas, how they're using AI tools to assist them. And they brought up two cases where they're using them. One, when they conduct these surveys and they go house to house, a lot of these smartphones, phones, and they're able to gather these survey results, but they just don't have the time and the money to go through the surveys, and they're using fairly complex language models, but that are still easy to use on the front end to analyze all the responses and then provide visualization of the responses in a way that's really helpful for the city. And the other one was something a little, sounds silly, but pothole repair, where, that's something that really is very devastating sometimes to people when they're driving and causes accidents and repair issues. And that the potholes in the sort of underrepresented areas are never fixed. They're never detected, and they're never reported, and they're never fixed. And so they figured out a way to use the cameras that were already installed there to detect potholes, and then using AI detect the depth of those potholes so that crews were alerted to where they are and what they needed to do to fix them. And they've been able to utilize that to fix, and it's something as simple as potholes, but it affects people's lives, and it really comes down to access.
Sure, feel free. I'm just going to repeat the question for the Zoom. So the question was that we also need to take a look at AI from a legal perspective and think about the risks that can come with AI and about the data that's input into a model and what could become discoverable through the output. So I'll open it up to anyone who might have thoughts on that.
I'm a recovering lawyer, so I'm going to turn it
Really segues into our next topic about AI governance, which is something all the entities and companies that are dealing with AI are kind of working on right now, figuring out how do we create the set of rules for us to operate under, for us to inform third-party vendors that are offering AI to operate under, and sometimes asking questions that don't necessarily get answers, because you want to know exactly, what happens to the data when I put it in. Is it confidential? Does it stay confidential? Are there ways of extracting that confidential information? Does it all go into a giant data lake? Are you using our data to improve your model that can then, be accessed by another client of yours? And, often I think those are questions that are difficult to answer. I think everyone's still kind of working through, and the reality is a lot of times those the way negotiations work at a company is that you have a contract attorney, you have a business person who's selling the product, and then you have the contract attorney negotiating the terms, and then maybe when it comes to the AI and data privacy, it goes to somebody else. But you may not be getting the answers you want from the other side because you're having these discussions with an attorney, and they're very detailed technical questions. So.
Well, I've been taking notes furiously throughout the day with at the different panels, and Judge Braden earlier today, and I haven't litigated in 10 years, so I may be wrong on this, but Judge Braden earlier today mentioned that there's a platform called Truth or Lie AI, right? And that piqued my interest because the first thing I thought was, who collected the inputs that can detect the micro expressions in the face? Because as a lawyer, the first thing I'm going to want to know if I'm tearing apart your data or what your evidence, I'm going to want to drill down into the tools you use to come to that information. One of the reasons there's a distrust of AI is because we don't trust ourselves as humans. And there's the bias that can get built into the platforms. So if the water dispensers in buildings can barely activate because of my dark skin, how is it going to know my micro expressions? Right. And then when you think about, the inputs, so that there had to be interpretive work done for the AI platform. Who were the people that did that interpretive work? Who were the psychologists and the psychiatrists who said that micro expression implies this or implies that? Because I would want to know, did people who look like me, were they involved in that process? And so you can kind of start parsing out what the biases and the limitations are of the technology. So you answer your question, I think more directly, I do believe at some point as good lawyers get in the courtroom on some of these tools, it will become discoverable, what types of tools you're using and what their limitations are to cast doubt, one way or the other.
And maybe to sort of also reframe that question, because as you both noted that we're in a little bit of a nascent stage, and in the past year to year and a half, there's been a lot of sort of legal activity, draft laws, executive orders, AI bills of rights, sort of all of these sort of guidance documents where I think governments are grappling to catch up and to give us governance and give us guidance and give us frameworks. Even in the EU AI Act, there's a political agreement on this law. I don't think we've seen the final language yet, but based on what we've seen thus far, what we're seeing in draft language and agreed upon legislation, can we draw any insights about what regulators are thinking about? Can we draw any insights about, as a society, here are some of the key points where we think that we're going to have to make some decisions?
I think it's too early to tell. Some of these items, the EU AI Act itself, the language is not finalized. And within the US, yes, there are executive orders that the White House has sent out, but they are not a comprehensive set of statutes or anything of that nature. So I think it's a developing field, but I think that's also really creates a unique opportunity for organizations and for citizens and for constituents to be able to think through and participate and have a voice in this dialogue. Very rarely do you get this kind of opportunity to engage in the regulatory frame setting for a completely new technology that we all know is going to change our lives. We're not turning back at this point from what we can see. So I think it's a real opportunity for everybody to be proactive and be trained. I mean, in terms of, corporations, I think there are a lot of companies that are thinking about this in a very thoughtful way. We at Nasdaq is making sure that we have an interdisciplinary approach to what our governance is going to be. So it's not just a legal issue. It's not just a technology issue, compliance issue. We look at it from a finance perspective. We look at it from a risk perspective. We look at it from a business perspective. And for us, also, we look at it from a regulatory perspective and get everybody's input. And also, you take a step back and think as an organization or as an individual, what are the principles value-based approach that you're going to take on with this new enormous tool and potential asset that you're going to have? And what are the, potential red flags? What are the areas that we need to be protected on? What are the areas that we should be trained on? How should the employees be trained? And so there are many, many different, I think, questions to be answered. I mean, my advice is for the government and the private sector to work very closely together with input from communities. It's a sort of a three-pronged approach that I think we're going to have.
Did you have any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, in the same way that, as Sean mentioned, telephones democratized communication, the internet democratized information, the PC democratized access to digital, resources. I think AI is going to really democratize the access to fairness. I go back to meritocracy. So when I read the EU and the US, proposed perspectives on AI, I think there are some themes that pop up over and over again, subject to political back and forth. I think some of the ones that we're going to really have to focus on, or that are eventually going to come out of this, privacy. I think I've told every young lawyer I've ever met, if you want to get into an area that's going to keep you busy for a long time, privacy is it. I think data security is going to be key. We see out of the U.S. Executive order that bias mitigation is fairly big. On the EU side, safety, how the system impacts human safety and well-being. Those are going to be key. And then I think just kind of ancillary to all of that, there's also going to be the question of like cross-border coordination between AI systems. So think standards that systems are able to communicate with each other in order to provide the same service, no matter where you are in the world. Because as they become more and more essential, when you think about cellular standards and other things like that, AI will become more embedded in our lives and how we do things. There will be the need for international cooperation around standards and data transfer.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think I agree in terms of the general themes you're seeing both in the EU as well as in the US. And I think frankly around the world, you've got governments around the world and legislators and policymakers trying to figure out how best stay ahead. And I think that's one of the themes we're hearing and seeing is policymakers around the world are fearful, not just potentially about the technology, but they're fearful about being a step behind. And I think there's a concern that in other contexts with technology, policymakers and their constituents have felt like the legislatures or the governments have not been proactive enough. And so I think you see a lot of activity, but I think along with that, though, you're also seeing, and we're sensing that many policymakers still are trying to figure out what the technology actually is and what it really means and what the manifestations of it might actually result in, both from a beneficial side, but also the fears and the harms. And certainly the election context is huge as well. So I think that's creating not, folks aren't stuck necessarily, but I think you're seeing sort of a push and pull that you always see in complex policy debates. But I think particularly where I think there are a lot of policymakers and their staffs really trying to learn the technology first. And I frankly would encourage them to do so. It's really, really complicated, and all the different legal issues that you're bringing up that intersect with it are going to be kind of issues of new impression. I mean, I think it's going to be really remarkable to see how the policy framework develops around it as well.
So to your point, and I encourage you all to challenge my framing of this if you disagree with it. But to your point, governments are trying to learn. They're trying to catch up. They know they need to do something, but they're probably not going to act quickly. So in the gap, companies have to set norms. What are companies thinking about as they're setting norms in this space in the absence of actual regulatory and legal guidance?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say the US government certainly acted relatively quickly though with the EO. So I mean, that's still there. I mean, obviously it doesn't have the force of law in terms of sustained over time past the administration potentially, but still it's a pretty impactful and important step that the administration took. And we are certainly working, we at OpenAI worked initially to kind of adhere to and work to establish voluntary commitments with the White House as well. Those are, I think, important steps in working with other model developers. But I think, you know, back to the points about privacy and security, safety, I think those are all important guardrails that we voluntarily and kind of proactively need to put into place with the models. Otherwise, you lose the trust of the customers and the constituents and the community. And then, you know, it's a deficit of trust that really kind of deteriorates the whole ecosystem, you know, at the very nascent stages of it. So I think if we don't take those steps, we aren't setting the norms around making sure that the benefits, you know, sharply outweigh the potential downsides, I think we're all setting ourselves up for failure.
Ghani, do you have any thoughts?
Well, yeah, you know, obviously it's difficult in the absence because you're grasping for something. You know, everyone's looking for an answer. So within the company, you have your engineers and your data scientists that have the tools available to them, and they want to have some bright line rules on what can I do, what can I do, and it's you know, they start looking to their legal departments often to answer those questions. So they're not easy questions to answer, certainly. At least at FedEx, we have an AI governance committee. I'm sure most companies have that by now. It's attorneys from multiple different disciplines, but I would say it is almost seems like a natural fit for the data privacy groups to kind of handle it. And that's probably because the data privacy they do already have governance in place, and it almost seems like a natural fit to expand it for AI, at least for now. But you know, obviously in the absence of any rules or regulations, it is difficult to navigate because you want to make sure you're placing your engineers and your innovative folks in a position to use these tools and succeed and be creative and efficient and using them for all the different, you know, various uses that you can think of. And at the same time, you want to mitigate risk and you want to, you know, make sure that you're within the guidelines of certain areas that do have more regulations and clarity, like data privacy. So, you know, I don't know if that answers the question, but you know, it's an interdisciplinary approach for sure. I think that's how it has to be. You need input from the business stakeholders so that you're not just providing, you know, sort of no's to your engineers and your creative folks. Obviously, we're going to look for more clarity, and some of it's going to come from a handful of cases or the courts now. And a lot of times that is where the clarity comes from.
Well, I'd like to switch gears for just a moment because we've been sort of talking about the uses of AI, but with the advent of AI comes a whole new avenue for professional development and professional growth. And so, you know, I'd like if you all to describe how you ended up working on AI issues.
Sure. So I was a partner at Hogan Lovells, gosh, more than 10 years ago now. I know I look young, but and I joined the SEC 10 years ago as a managing executive of one of the major divisions within the agency to take on more of a chief operating managing executive role. And part of that portfolio was related to technology, strategy, business management and operations, and continuous improvements around that, as well as human capital, et cetera. And I took that step after having been a capital markets, M&A, corporate governance lawyer for a long time, because I thought, gosh, I think I can do more. I think I can be a principal decision maker as opposed to being just an advisor. And I'm not suggesting that lawyers are just advisors. They're strategic partners and all that good stuff. But, you know, for me personally, I thought this is a step that I feel like I should take. And that step, while it was really transformative for me, and I had a lot of, you know, sort of huge learning curve, understanding some of the things that I had to learn at a major agency. It's what allowed me to kind of take on the responsibilities now at Nasdaq, which is a major fintech company. You know, we provide, as I mentioned, we operate 15 different exchanges around the world. We provide market platform technology, operating expertise to other, you know, markets around the world. And we also have a division that is focused on anti-financial crime tools for banks and broker dealers, et cetera. And, you know, I think about that switch because it's put me on a path. And I think it's really important to sort of think about, you know, potentially taking a, you know, leap of faith beyond the legal sort of path. I thought I was going to be a Hogan partner forever. I thought that was like getting tenure and it seemed very comfortable, but and just sort of taking those risks and learning new areas, I think is something that I would highly, highly encourage because you don't know what kind of benefits will bring. And it's very, very scary to make those kind of transitional sort of steps. But I can tell you that if you do your homework, if you put in the effort, and if you kind of, you know, stick with it, it can reap benefits.
Well, I think my involvement was maybe less deliberate than I kind of, it was a little more natural. I had an electrical engineering undergrad, and I, after law school, did patent prosecution, and you know, kind of do the work that comes your way. So I ended up doing a lot of work that related to AI. I think early on it was mostly related to medical imaging and MRIs, where they're using AI to help detect or improve their imaging models for detecting cancers and abnormalities and things like that. And then it, you know, it slowly expanded there, and then you know, that's sort of how you become an expert in the field. You just keep doing it. And then I assisted when I worked at Finnegan with teaching CLE classes about prosecuting patents, but machine learning and AI spaces. And then now, you know, at FedEx, you find myself assisting when we're dealing with AI through either our contracts or with our vendors, or internally when we're looking at protecting AI models that we've created internally, or just other IP issues that come up. So it's kind of more natural progression.
Yeah, like Ghani, for me, it's just being open to new opportunities, being intellectually curious, saying yes when the opportunity arises. I started off as a patent litigator, transitioned to, 10 years ago to transactions, did tech transactions for a while, aviation for a brief part of that, and then moved over to what the responsibilities I have now. And then the company began leaning into AI. So it's kind of molding yourself as a lawyer to learn, be willing to learn, and to do what is necessary for your clients, what's best for your client.
Yeah, I think similar path in a way. I guess I'd frame it more as I'm just a dork and a nerd, and I like this sort of stuff. And I was never smart enough to be an engineer or a scientist, so I took not that lawyers aren't smart, but I wasn't smart enough to do the math piece. And this has just been a great opportunity, whether on the Hill when I was doing technology work at Microsoft, but then also here. And honestly, I think what's been fascinating about this, and this actually goes back to the earlier conversation about access. For me, I feel like I have a new window into the opportunities to learn about AI and all these different disciplines using the tools. And I frankly would encourage folks here just to try it out if you haven't yet used, some of the generative AI tools, whether it's ChatGPT or some other tool. It actually opens up a whole set of windows for learning that I think is really, for me, pretty exciting, and a way for me to kind of, have this sort of flywheel of opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're totally right. I mean, I think that that's the whole reason why, for at least for us, and the reason why I mentioned that there are other tools out there is because I just want to put out there that we can only try to control and work with our tools and what's out there, right? That being said, I think the risks that you've identified are absolutely on mark. I mean, there's risks of adoption by folks using it in ways they shouldn't be. We have very clear usage policies against, frankly, using it for certain consequential decision making around whether it's legal issues or housing, employment, use in the military context. I mean, so it's very clear in terms of, but we appreciate and understand that that doesn't mean that folks aren't going to try and, bang away at it and try to get it to, tell me how to use it to hack into a system. Tell me how to use it to build a bomb. Tell me how to use it to, harm myself, right? So that we have a whole system at the model level of development. I mean, I actually will, maybe I'll send it to Lynn or Esther. We have a blog, just a link for just explaining how the technology works, right? The basics of it, but importantly, also some of the safety systems that are embedded into the model layer, as well as afterwards when it comes to red teaming and fine tuning and making sure the mitigation. So the model will refuse if somebody asks it or prompts it to, talk about a violent act or trying to create, like, it will refuse to do that. It should. And ChatGPT. Uh-huh. Yeah. But I'll push you on that. Did you ask the question, how do I cause urban disruption? Did you ask the question, how do I cause urban disruption? The harm that you're concerned about, did you ask the question about the harm that you're concerned about? Okay, let's offline about this. I'm not sure if I think we're crossing lines here.
We'll go deep into prompt engineering, you're right?
If the proper systems aren't in place, you're right, it shouldn't be used. I speak to OpenAI, we're certainly trying, and it's not perfect. We have red teaming, we have folks who have a whole research arm on preparedness to try to go after catastrophic risks for cybersecurity, individualized persuasion, bio risks, nuclear terrorism, all those different things. We have research. Well, we already have model layer protection.
I do want to make sure that we are able to have other questions. Yeah.
Sorry,
No. I wanted to talk about mitigations, but we have other questions.
Okay. I just realized in that last exchange, we didn't repeat it for the Zoom. What I'm hearing is a question about essentially nation state localization for AI infrastructure and legislation, and what are our thoughts about that?
Can I, maybe I'll go first, but say one quick thing before I share my view on your specific question. You know, I think bad actors are going to do whatever they have and use the tools available to them to create issues for the rest of the society. And I think, you know, as someone whose job is to monitor the trading markets and maintain fairness and orderliness of those markets, and also to protect investors, it's really important for us to not shy away from the scariness of this technology, but embrace it with openness and learn ourselves and move forward with it. Because the bad act may not be anything new, but with generative AI, it'll increase the scale, it'll open up the accessibility, and it'll create repetition of the bad actor in ways that we probably haven't seen before. So just FYI, I think, although there are definitely questions around the parameters and governance of the technology itself, I think the rest of us really need to think about making sure that we're, using the same tools to combat and prevent the bad actors from using those tools to disrupt, whatever it is that we're doing. And I think to answer your question, I mean, from what I can see, as someone who operates the regulatory aspect of the work that we do at a global level, I think that everybody's thinking about this with the right framework, with the right mindset in terms of creating progress and understanding and solid ground for which all of us can operate, whether we're companies or individuals. I think, though, where my concern is more along the lines of, are we going to have the appropriate level of harmonization across the globe to make sure that there aren't conflicting or multi-layers of regulation that gets created with respect to this kind of technology? Yes, yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you for the feedback and the question, and we'll leave that for the next break to continue the discussion. I know we can probably spend another half day easily on this topic, but as a point of personal privilege, I'd like to just step back from the heart of the AI discussion we've been having. As a co-chair of this conference, I'm looking at this panel and the diversity that's reflected, talking about one of the most central technological developments that's going to shape our workforce as well as impact the lives of our children, the next generation. So I'm looking at Chan. We knew each other since we were baby lawyers. And I think when he started out his distinguished legal career, he didn't know what AI was. And here he is at OpenAI shaping our world. I look at Ghani, who was a colleague at the firm. We worked closely together, and we also taught at Howard Law School, growing the next generation of leaders in the legal profession. And here he is at FedEx deploying AI technology to get our packages to us on time. And Una, I met more recently because our daughters are close friends and they're on the same basketball team. And I didn't realize that, I knew she was fairly high up in Nasdaq, but I didn't really understand the role that she had at Nasdaq in terms of using and enforcing AI and shaping how this enormous entity views AI and is shaping that. And we only learned that because we were at a Halloween, trick-or-treating party together. And Andy, I've had the distinct pleasure of meeting him because of USIPA involvement and other things. And what can I say about Andy, but that I aspire to be Andy when I grow up. He's someone that I really look up to because he really cares about not only technology and IP and what it can do for our communities, but also uplifting others. And in everything that he does, he thinks about DEI. So I respect every single one of the panelists, and I'm so inspired that as we grapple with the difficult topic of AI and how it's impacting us now, how it's evolving, what it will be in the next 2 generations, that we need more people like that are reflected on this panel, shaping, guiding the creation, the development, and enforcement and regulation of this technology that's going to be increasingly central in the way we work and the way we live. So I really want to extend heartfelt thanks to every single one of the panelists that are represented, and hope that the development of AI will also equally reflect the diversity represented on this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.